In this video, I am going to line up my projection setup with the rest of my scene and basically lining up my projection camera with my actual shot cam here. If you'd like to follow along but you didn't follow the previous videos, you can open the file v14.nk in the Nuke's directory. Now, how am I going to modify the position of my camera and my asteroid at the same time in order to keep the relationship, to keep the projection working? Well, for doing that, I am going to use an axis. What is an axis? Well, we can create one to see in the 3D menu and then axis here. What is an axis? Well, it's that little thing here, which is actually nothing. It's just a 3D point. It doesn't have a geometry to be rendered. This is just coordinates. This axis got translate, rotate, and scale coordinates. And we are going to use that axis to drive at the same time the position of our camera and the position of the rocks here. As you can see here on the camera node, we do have an axis input. And I will plug that axis input to my axis 1 here. And now, if I move this axis, I'm actually moving my camera. It doesn't modify the properties of my camera 1. If you look here, actually everything is great because protected because we are on read from file mode. If you look at it here, I'm modifying the camera. You can see it in the 3D space, but I'm not touching at those properties, which is great. Now, I will need to do the same thing with the read geo and make sure that those guys are moving the same way according to this axis here. So I don't have any axis input on my read geo node, but I can use a node that we called transform geo right here. I will select it, create it, and I will connect that input to my read geo and connect that guy here, basically like that. And now there is an axis input here, and I will connect that axis to this axis as well. Now, as you can see, it moved here. Now, if I modify my axis, everything will move together. And the scale as well, and the translate as well. So that way, I'm sure that I'm keeping the relationship between my camera and my object. If I were to plug my scanline render, the camera input to my camera here, and I were to look here in 2D, whatever I will do here, whatever position, scale I will give to this axis wouldn't break my projection. So now, using that axis, I will be able to match the position and scale and orientation of my other camera. So let's do that. I will jump back to the 3D viewer, and now let's see how to match those positions. So first thing first, how this axis is working. Well, when I'm modifying my camera according to this axis, it's a little bit like if my axis were the pivot point of all my objects. So if I want to modify and match the position of this camera to my shot cam, the easiest thing will be first to have my pivot center at the center of my camera. And how I will do that? Well, first let's revert everything to 0. So rotation as well, scale is fine, and uniform scale should be 1. There we go. Now, let's see the position of my current camera here. So it's very hard to read because it's on read from file mode, so maybe I could just uncheck that guy to be able to see properly what's going on. And if I want my axis to be at the center of my camera, well, I will need the pivot points here of my axis to be at the exact same location. So I could copy and paste those values, but I can as well come here and click on that little menu and drag and drop to my pivot. And that way I could easily copy and paste values. So now, if you look at the axis, it's actually at the center of my camera. And this is better. For example, if I rotate it, you can see that I'm rotating from the pivot point, which is at the center of the camera here. Great. Okay, put it back to 0 for now. And now, well, to match this position, let's see where is actually my original shot cam. So we'll come here, open my shot cam, and go to camera to see the position. So it's very hard to see as well because we are on read from file. So we'll uncheck the read from file. And I can now see what are my positions. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Perfect. It's very easy, right? It's at the center origin of the world. It's as well very important before matching the position of the camera to make sure that you are on the right frame. And here it's 1100 because this is the reference frame for our projection. If I were to use a different frame, maybe my shot cam will have a different position. So I will need to make sure that this camera is now at the center. Well, how can I do that? Well, if my camera has those positions right now, for example, 307 in X and 36 in Y. In order to get the position 0, well, I will need to do a minus 307 in X and a minus 36 in Y. And I will do as well the opposite of the Z position. So let's do that. With my axis, I will take those values and go here to translate. And now it will move the camera a little bit. But if I negate those values by adding a minus here, and plus here, because minus plus minus equal plus, now my camera will be at the center of the world. Now I will do the same thing with the orientation. The orientation is supposed to be 0. Well, let's take the position, the rotation of my camera here, applying it to the axis, and invert it. Perfect. Now the camera is looking at the same direction. And now I need to do the same thing for the scale. And as you can see here, the camera is scaled by 147 points, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I will select that value. I will select it all by doing a Control A and then Control C. And as you can see here, it's modified in X, Y, and Z. So basically, it's a uniform transform. So what I can do here is to come to my axis and I will modify the uniform scale instead of modifying X, Y, and Z here. And basically, I need to invert the scale. And so for that, I will do 1 divide, and I can type my formula here by Control V, the value here, and hit Enter. And it will find the actual scale that I need to transform. And so now if I look, I do have my shot cam here. Up. And I have here my camera 1. And they are matching. That's perfect. Okay, so I will connect back my camera here out of my skyline, out of my shot cam, and let's see if my projection is working now that my push cam is lining up with my shot cam. And if I look at here, and I will switch back to the 2D mode with the tab key, and no. If I check with what I were supposed to see here, well, no, this is not exactly the same. Well, what is going on? Well, we have a problem now with the focal length of the camera. So let's see in the next clip how to solve that issue. See you there.